Hi, welcome to my session. My name is Mark Heaps, and during this session, we're going to look at how to play your way to professional designs in Adobe Illustrator. I work as a creative director down here in Austin, Texas, where we serve a plethora of clients doing projects related to data visualization, visual storytelling, communication, infographics, and a lot of things specialized in the presentation media spaces. During this session, I want to talk about some of the ideas that we've used for our client projects and other ways that we just play to explore based on some of the trends that we're seeing in the design industry. Trends like things that I found on Behance to show you here. These examples that you're seeing are really expressive pieces with different geometry, interesting patterns, use of lines, just really getting back to some of the fundamentals and principles of good graphic design. And so for this session, I call this playful geometry. And this playful geometry is really just going to come from us exploring and playing inside of Adobe Illustrator, but knowing how to turn that into a production positive technique so that you can replicate the style easily or share with other team members is really key to being effective after this session. Getting back to the point of play though, this is something we've all done since we were kids, and it's probably something that we love doing, which is why we got into graphic design in the first place. Playing with a paintbrush, using a spirograph, maybe just doodling on a wall, or adding to the mural at Adobe Max. We want to take that mindset and apply it to our graphic design projects. So let's dive in and take a look at some of the projects that we're going to be covering today. So just to give you a little context about this first project, I was actually in a meeting with a client and we were talking about a presentation story that we had to design that was called The Fastest Path to Performance. And I'm going to show you an example of what this was built out like. But you're probably like me, during the meeting, you're sketching some ideas, you're doodling your thoughts. And that's really where this started for me, with this idea of what does a path really mean visually, and how can we make that interesting as we're moving through a piece of content? And as I'm ideating on this, I started thinking of some of the places that I've seen paths. Paths turned into the idea of stripes. Stripes turned into the idea of some of these really cool retro graphics that I saw as a kid on vans and cars and motorcycles and other different vehicles. And I thought, well, this would be really perfect to create a unique style and help navigate an audience through the different content. Let me show you what I mean as a finished product, and then I'll show you actually how to build it. So here's an example of how that started. First, we see all these different paths loading together. And this is, I removed the content that our client actually had and just put in some fake content for this demo. But you can see here all of these paths that were drawn and animated in. And then when we click through, this moves from page to page, loading content that is on the path. So I had to think of a way to create this striping technique that would be able to animate and move through from slide to slide. So here you can see we actually loaded in the new Learn panel for Adobe Illustrator. If you haven't seen this, check it out. It's under the window menu, come down to Learn. In this panel, you see all the new tutorials for Adobe Illustrator, and these are updated frequently and remotely by Adobe. Little tidbit, I got to create these lessons that are currently in the Learn panel, and it was a lot of fun. As this animates up again, you can see we're loading in some text here, but all along following this stripe. So when we had the original idea during the sketches, we had to really think about what would be the best way to produce this asset, and we need to produce it in a way that it would be replicable in other projects in the future so that these could all connect as part of a campaign. All right, now that you have an idea of what it is, let's go dive into Illustrator. And to make this project asset and build this theme out, we experimented with a lot of different ideas of how to make lines. Do we draw multiple paths and blend them? Do we do patterns? And in the end, we settled on this idea of creating a brush out of all of these individual little squares that repeat the brand colors. So these are just connected here by stacking them and aligning them. And I want to show you exactly how we built that object or that asset so that it was reusable by everyone on our team. So let me just make this a little bit bigger here. The way we did this is by going to Window, Brushes, and bringing up the Brushes panel. And the Brushes panel allows you to drag your artwork into that panel and create a number of different type of brushes. In this case, we don't want to scatter the brush. And even though it seems like we would make a pattern, there's a real distinct reason that we don't want to do that. So we're going to use Art Brush, and I'll explain that reason why here in just a minute. We press OK, and then your art brush options come to the surface in a dialog box. And what's important here is this note that says stretch to fit stroke length. So what this does is it takes each of those squares and stretches them along the duration of a path, rather than a pattern which would repeat the objects again and again and again. And if you ever expanded that, you would end up with hundreds of these little squares. So by stretching it, we don't have that issue. Now you can see the direction here. There's an arrow pointing down. We don't want that to be pointing down. We actually want it to point right, so that as this is following a path, it is stretching the squares along that general direction. So let's go ahead and press OK here. Let's give it a name. We'll call it Retro Stripe. Press OK. And now you can see in my brushes panel, I actually have an example of what this brush will look like. So how did we use this in the project? Well, let me zoom out and show you what we did. Here is a series of artboards, which basically mimicked the project navigation at large. Just move this brush panel out of the way a little bit. And the way that this worked is we basically took a path with a pen tool and we drew through all of these artboards. So you could go to here, click and then move up here, and then go all the way to the end. Okay, now I don't want that cream tan fill in here. That's not helping anything. So I'm gonna press escape to deactivate my pen tool, and then I'm gonna go over here and remove that fill property, right? And if I click on the stroke, what I'm gonna do now is instead of applying a color to it, go to my brush panel, click on the retro stripe, and you can see that moves through all of those artboards. If you've never created the artboards before or used extra artboards, it's really, really easy. You actually have an artboard tool inside of Illustrator here, and that changes your properties panel to have artboard options over here on the right. If you want to add an artboard, you simply click the plus symbol here, choose your orientation for that particular artboard, and then you can move them around using the artboard tool like so. For this project, we lined them up so they were edge to edge, so that as we want to cut the stripe or the path between screens, it was very easy to do. So here you can see that path moving across. Now I want to change this so it has some curves. And while we have the path selected with the regular selection tool, I'm going to change this to the direct select tool, which now gives me access to these radius controls in all of the corners. That's what that little white dot is. So let's just zoom back out here. So you can see that radius control, if I click and drag on it, it will start curving these corners with the radius and makes this look a little bit more fluid and interesting in the way that it's moving through the screens. Once you're happy with that, I would always recommend when working, make a copy and move it off of the artboard, just so you've got kind of a backup of your artwork while you're constructing. But in essence, you've now got a path that follows the screens. Now, the great thing about making this into a brush is if there are any other assets in the future, maybe we need some kind of circular frame, you can simply click that brush, and now we've got a circular frame that follows that same design treatment, right? So this is something that you could share with everybody on your team. But how do we get this to be an individualized asset that we could then export to other programs for use? Well, all we're gonna do is simply select that path. We're then going to grab our scissor tool for cutting the path. You just use the quick key letter C to bring that up. And then come here where the artboard joins right on the edge and cut your path. So I'll cut that one there, that one there. I'm being a little bit rough about this for time, but you'll be able to see now if I select any of these individual pieces, I can pull them out. So now I've got my brush following the path that is then cut to the screens that we're working in. And this way I know each asset will line up to itself because we drew it originally as one fluid line. The last thing for us to do here is make sure that this will import into a website or another program, is remove it from no longer being a brush, because other programs won't understand your Illustrator brush unless you're going into a program like InDesign or Photoshop or one of the other programs in the Adobe array of Creative Cloud. So we just take that path, we select everything there, we go to Object, Expand Appearance, and now you can see, if I grab one of these again, it's actually made up, I'll ungroup it, it's made up of these individual objects, right? That's the reason we wanted to stretch that shape along the brush rather than use a pattern brush which repeats. If we'd expanded this when we used the pattern brush, we would have got hundreds and hundreds of little squares that were repeating, but this allows us to have one fluid object at this point. From here, you would export this to an SVG, or if you had to share with a team member, come over to your libraries area in Adobe Illustrator, and you could grab any of these objects. Now, I'm going to grab the one that still has my brush applied to it, and I'm just going to drag that into my library, rename this as RetroPath. And then if I go to the plus symbol, this will bring up my Creative Cloud desktop app. And this allows me to share this library with anybody that has a Creative Cloud account. So I can put their email address into this area, make sure that they're set to can edit, and then I would just go ahead and invite them. And then when they drag that out or double click on it in their library, it will open in Illustrator and that brush will automatically show up in their brushes panel. So when that shows up for them, they can continue working on a project using the same scale, the same assets that we did when we were working. All right, that was a quick one. I know we don't have a lot of time. Let's dive into the next project. Okay, so let's take a look at this next project. So this is actually a piece that was made for one of our clients that's in the beverage industry, and they hired us to create graphics where they could stage the product, and it got used in an interactive training piece explaining the new product to people that were doing sales. And so this is a pretty classic look for them where they have the can, we put it on a surface, we create some shading, create a background environment, and then animate this from there. But I started really thinking, what if I could play with this and come up with some new approaches in the way that I want to stage this product? So let's jump into Illustrator and I'll show you with some of the ways that I play with that. Okay, so here we are in Illustrator, and with this project, one of the things that I started with was simply grabbing the pencil tool here in Illustrator. I double click on it to change my pencil tool options so that the fidelity is set to smooth. And this helps if you have any sort of very quick motions that make a jaggedy line. If you want those to smooth out, this is really, really helpful. And I started playing with these ideas of what would it look like if I just had lines kind of shooting out of this piece, right? And so I was drawing these lines, just trying to get my ideas going. Like, what would it look like to sketch that? What would it look like to blend something around? And as I was playing with this, I went in here, let me set these to black so that you'll be able to see them more easily. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. Maybe if I had like a pattern of lines. And in the end, it resulted in me playing with a feature, which we've had in Illustrator forever, called Blend. So I go to Object Blend, Make. And you can see there what that did is it added extra lines between the original lines that I had drawn. What's interesting is now you can go from Object Blend to Object Blend Options, and you can increase that value. So by default, it sets the spacing to smooth color, but if I change this to specified steps, I could put a number in here like 24, and you can see that makes a really interesting kind of form. It looks a little bit like some of the Adobe Max graphics that we've seen here for this event. So I could send that to back and kind of look at it and go, well, that's interesting. It's doing something neat as a graphic form, but it's not much of a stage, right? It does give me some interesting patterns. I could make duplicates of this and stretch it and flip it around. I could rotate it in some ways. I could use my direct select tool to grab any of these anchor points and pull them out and space and change and alter the blend. So that's pretty fun. But this, again, isn't much of a stage. So I liked the technique, but not for the project. So what we ended up doing was, let's move the can out of the scene here, coming in and using our pen tool to just click and draw in what would actually look like a perspective stage, as this is commonly how we present some of these products. So as I draw that little angular left side of the stage, I'm going to press Escape and deactivate the pen tool. I'm going to go ahead and fill that stroke with a black color. And then what I'm going to do is make a duplicate of this, copy and paste. Oops, let's grab our actual object, copy and paste. Let's move that over there. And then we're going to go ahead and reflect this so it's flipped facing the other way. Now I want to do this vertically so it looks like a mirror of the original path. And I'll drag this over here to make our stage. So there we've got two lines that are basically a reflection of one another. So same technique, we'll go to Object Blend, Blend Make. You'll see we get two lines in the middle there, and that's because of that default setting to blend with smooth color. But if I go back to Blend Options, change it from smooth color to specified steps, I can keep increasing the number here until I get something that looks like a stage, which is pretty cool. Now, I'm going to increase that number a little bit higher. Let's try 80. I like that. I'm going to press OK. And so now I've got a blend that if I put our product back in here, kind of looks like it's on a stage. And I really like the lines. I like the form that's happening. But what's neat about this is just like when we were doing that retro path, I started thinking about what would it look like if I just played with it rather than settle for what we've got here. And what was interesting is if I grabbed the direct select tool, after selecting the object, I could go and see these little radius points again, just like we saw in the path earlier. And this allowed me to click and drag and create kind of a ramp shape, right? So you can see that radius getting added and the blend is automatically calculated. So let me make that a little bit smaller. This gave me a really, really interesting form. And so from here, you could start experimenting with different colors. Do you want to wash it out to transparency? Or maybe I just stretch the whole object to the entire size of the artboard. So as we lay this out on the piece, we can then move the product back in. And this gives me a pretty good stage for being able to put in text copy as a poster environment. So that's another way of playing with just something as simple as the pencil tool or the pen tool, a basic line, and then using blend to change the form and appearance that we're using in our design. If at any point you're not happy with it or you want to increase the density, just go simply back into those blend options and increase the number. So I could go in here and say, you know what, let's do 96. And that makes it more dense again. What's also great about this is you can also change the stroke weight. And so this can give you a completely different appearance of effect. You can even go in there and choose dotted lines like a dashed line, and that gives you something pretty crazy. So you just start thinking about, okay, I think I'm done. What else can I turn on just to see what it does to it? And does that give me some kind of delight for my project? I don't like the dashed line, so we're gonna turn that off. All right, let's look at our next project. Another great way to play is just, and you're probably already doing this, but when you're out and about and you see things that inspire you, taking a picture of them with your camera, and then when you get back to your station, thinking about how would I build this for use in one of my projects. So whether you're out and you see something on a magazine like a piece of text, or maybe you saw a really interesting texture on a wall or on the sidewalk or some piece of concrete, or maybe you saw just some interesting kind of shape and what would that look like as a pattern. We're going to take a look at now how to build that so that's the best practice in being production positive for your projects. So let's dive over into Illustrator and take a look at a few of these. Okay, so let's take a look at how we might create something like this title that I found on a magazine when I was out and about. I think I was at a dentist office, and I saw this title and thought, wow, that's really cool. I wonder how I might recreate that. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking, yeah, I would draw my type, I would copy and paste it, I would then stroke that, I would copy and paste again, do a nice dark fill, I would arrange and align these, there's nothing wrong with that approach. Although it is very hard to replicate if you have to make lots of titles for your project. So the way to do this and be production positive is really utilize effects and the appearance panel. So let me show you what I mean. First, I've got a word here that I typed. You can see I can highlight this text. And what we want to do is actually get rid of the black fill on the type because this is part of the characters and we want Illustrator to see this as an object. So let's remove that fill. You won't be able to see anything for a second. And now at the bottom of the appearance panel, which by the way, if you haven't accessed the appearance panel before, you can access it in the properties panel. You'll see it says appearance here. Click on the three dots down in the bottom right area, or you can go up to window and come down to where it says appearance. Shift F6 is the quick key. Let's go ahead and click on new fill, the button at the bottom left of the appearance panel. So we'll click here. And you can see there, we've now added a new fill, which is above the character property in the appearance panel. And I'm going to choose some kind of light tan color for this. So I think I'm just going to go over here to my traditional color picker. Let's go into this kind of warm area, something similar to what they have. We'll press OK. And now I see three parts to this actual type. We've got a dark shadow and a dotted line. Let's make the dark shadow first. So I'm going to go in here and actually choose another fill. And you can see now in the appearance panel that we have two of these fill properties. If I go to the bottom one, I'm going to choose kind of a dark green color as an offset. So that green will get me close to start with. I'll go back into my color picker and just darken that up a bunch. Maybe go a little bit colder. Yep, that'll work for me. We'll press OK. Now you can't see it because the tan cream fill is on top of it. If I turn that eyeball off in the appearance panel, you'll see that color is in fact there. It's just not visible because they're stacked. But the appearance panel is dynamic. You can actually move these things around. You can drag them on top of each other, below each other. It's really handy for creating a particular appearance. Now what I want to do is select this dark teal green fill, which is supposed to be our shadow. Click on that and go up to Effect and come down to where it says Distort and Transform and choose Transform. And don't worry, if I'm going kind of fast and you're saying, hey, I can't keep up, you're going to be able to watch these videos again, or there's also a worksheet handout for this session, which I break everything down step by step, and you'll be able to follow along at your own pace. So don't stress out about it. Okay, now we've got the transform effect up. What's great about this is because we selected only the dark green fill, we can use the move value here to actually offset that darker color. So you can see as I'm dragging these sliders in, I can offset that. That's pretty close to where it was, but I might want to bring that back just a little bit. Maybe somewhere about 0.08 there. If you're in other parts of the world using the metric system, that's fine. You could adjust this for millimeters and centimeters. So let's make this 0.08 as well. So now I've got kind of that tight offset on the shadow. I'm going to press OK. Now the dotted line in here, that is not a fill. That would typically be a stroke. Down here at the bottom of the appearance panel again, we can add a new stroke. It looks like theirs is white, so I'm going to go ahead and choose first a red. And the reason I do this is so that I can see what it looks like, and then I can go back and change the color easily afterwards. So we've got our red chosen here. I've got my weight, but again, you can see it's lining up to the original text of the object. So I'm just going to go back into Effect while I have that stroke targeted in the appearance panel over here. Go to Effect and come down to Transform. And because that was the last effect I used, it shows up in your recent effect options. We'll choose this, and then I'm going to go in and offset it. And you can see the last values are visible here. So as we're making our adjustment, let's do something that's halfway between those 2 points. So 0.04 for me and 0.04 again. And now you can see if I press OK and zoom in, we've got our original fill color, our dark teal green offset shadow, and the red stroke. And then the last thing I need to do to set up the stroke as a dotted line is click on the stroke controller here. It's set to 1 point, but I want to use a dashed line. So let's click on dashed line. And you can see now I've got it set to 0.5 for the dash. And this is important. If you want to get those little round dots, the dash should be half the size of the stroke weight. And then the gap is how far you want in between each of those little dots. But you notice I'm not getting little circles. And the reason for that is we need to set the cap to a round cap right here in the stroke properties. And then same thing with our corner. And then you can choose where you want to split your path. Once you've got this set, we could go back into our color, choose something like a white. We'll click off of this and zoom back out. And you can see we've created something that's very, very similar to what was in the magazine. Now what's cool about this though is this is still editable text. So if I was to copy this and offset, I could highlight it with my text tool, type the word more, and you can see it's retained that visual appearance style for us. But what if you have to work on something and you want to share it with other people, or you know you're going to have to do a lot of these in the future? You probably don't want to have to keep opening the same file again and again and again. Well, one thing that you can do with Illustrator is once you've created an appearance for your type, and this has transform controls and effects and everything on it, we can simply come from Window in the top menu here down to Graphic Styles. And when this panel shows up, there's a little plus button over here on the lower right. And when you click on that, that actually is going to allow you to add a graphic style to the panel. And when you add your graphic style to this panel, it means anytime you create a piece of type, right? So let's go ahead and type the word more again. You can see here that it's just regular black text. But if I click on that graphic style that we've added, it automatically formats it for us with the same appearance properties. And if you make it bigger, you can see it adjusts. If you click it again, it'll reset that. So there's all kinds of ways you can use these graphic styles to speed up your workflow and replicate a visual appearance. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So here's another good example of experimenting with effects to create a certain visual style. Remember when we were all kids and we used that Spirograph tool and we would draw and trace and it would make these sort of shapes and patterns for us? Well, you're probably looking at this thinking, I know how to do that. I'm just going to draw a bunch of shapes and then I'm going to rotate copies around a center point. But this actually isn't done that way. Let me show you exactly what it is. It's actually a piece of type. So if I was just to copy and paste real quick that piece of type down here, I could then go up to Effect, just like we did earlier, come down to Transform, and then in here we could set a rotate value. Instead of using the offset for move, here we've got 11.25 by 32 copies. And how did we get that? Well, we actually typed into this box 360 degrees divided by 32. And that gave us the math calculation. That's right, Illustrator can actually do calculated math for you, which is pretty cool. The trick to making this look so good, though, is choosing one of the anchors for the rotational position to be different than center. Center looks very dense, but if we choose this on the left, you can see it rotates around that left alignment of the type. Now, what's really interesting about this, and let's go ahead and delete this extra one, is you can now manipulate that type to change the pattern. So if I added a space before the first letter, you could see it opens up the middle. You could even do things like try a different font to see if it gives you a better pattern. If I switch this to Optima, for example, this looks much sharper and much more like a vortex. So you can use this to experiment with an overall style of graphic creation. I could totally see using this in the background of one of our designs. But what's even cooler is I can just go in and highlight and change the word to something else. So as I change that, maybe I change our font size over here. Let's do something really small, like 72. You can see that gives me a completely different appearance. So it's very fast, very editable, and a great way to use effects with type to create a pattern. So here's our last example, and this is a different approach yet again. So you can see I've got some weathered text here, but this is still editable type. So if I went in here and typed a different word completely and clicked off of that, you would see it still has this distress texture and also some edging on it. So how do we get there? Well, it's a pretty simple process. We actually start with an image like this, and we go into our image trace control inside of Adobe Illustrator. And in here, we have an option for black and white. So if I check preview, you can see this actually converts the photograph here, which we shot with our phone, to create this fun type of texture. Now I'm just going to increase that threshold a little bit. And when you're happy with this, you can then close the image trace, go to Object, and choose Expand. This is going to give you some options here for expanding the object and the fill. We're going to press OK. And then we're going to go ahead and make sure we choose Expand one more time and then Ungroup. So again, Object, Ungroup. And the reason we do this is now we want to use the Direct Select tool because there's actually a white fill in the background here. So we want to delete these as much as possible. So anytime I roll my cursor over, I'm looking for any of those little white fills. I don't see any more big ones, so I think we're good to go. So the next step here is to actually reduce the size of this tile that we've made, and we're going to actually turn this into a pattern. So if we go to Window and come down to where we say Pattern Options, in the pull-down menu on the right here, we can choose Make Pattern. The new pattern has been added to our swatch panel over here. We'll press OK. And now you can see this repeating inside of the pattern editor. Now I'm going to change this from grid to brick by row. And if you want to get even more custom with this, there's a button at the top that allows you to adjust the pattern tile tool. So you could drag this in, change the size, blend this if you want to. This can be particularly handy if you actually use the hex by row, because then you can adjust the size of the hexagon until you see things line up nice and tight. So I might use something like that, press done. And now we actually have a swatch in our swatch panel that if we created a piece of type, let's do this again, we'll use the word create. I'm going to go choose my favorite Franklin Gothic. Get the nice bold one here. And then for my fill property, we're going to use that appearance panel again, right? So here my font might have something like a really nice light gray. But then in the appearance panel, I'm going to add an extra fill. And from the pull down, we'll see our swatches panel and we'll choose our rock texture pattern. And there you can see it's actually adding that texture to our type, but it allows us to keep this as completely editable text. All right, well, that's all for me from down here in Austin, Texas. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you learned something and found it useful to create and play in Adobe Illustrator. My name is Mark Heaps, at Life by Pixels on social media, and make sure you check out my other session at Adobe Max, Tips and Tricks for Designers in Photoshop. See you guys next time.